Hello and welcome to part 2 of what is referred to as the teardrop ride, because when you see the last clip and the map that follows, you'll see that the ride looks a little bit like a teardrop. I'm on the Woodhouseley Road, having just taken the turn off the Crookle Road onto Woodhouseley. There is no actual, there is a little settlement called Woodhouseley which I'll go through on this ride. There's a church, or what used to be a church, but I think has now been sold and is a private house, and a couple of other buildings. And then a little bit further on I will turn off the Woodhouseley Road onto the Middle Arm Road and go through the little settlement of Roslyn, again where there's a church and a house and a bushfire brigade building. And then towards the end of the clip I'll go down a road that says to Golspie, or to Traralgon via Golspie. Now I was going to go down that road and go to Traralgon through this place called Golspie, which I'd never been before, but I thought I'd go there. Only I got about 50 metres down the road and realised that could see that it was a dirt road. So as you'll see towards the end of the clip, I turned the bike around and went back onto the Middle Arm Road and then back towards Roslyn, mainly because I'd ridden on the dirt road from Middle Arm Road in a previous ride, and I decided I no longer wanted to ride this bike on dirt roads, and I just felt it wasn't a good ride. It wasn't very comfortable. It wasn't all that unsafe, but it just wasn't very comfortable, a very pleasant ride. So I turned around and went in a different direction. You'll see that in future clips. Now at the moment you can see the Woodhouseley Road in front of you, and it's in pretty good condition. It's pretty well maintained. It doesn't always have markings down the centre, which is a bit disconcerting, but then there's not a lot of traffic on this road. You'd only go on it if you actually lived on this road, because it's a sort of through road to somewhere else. But there's no reason to go to Woodhouseley unless you live there. So it doesn't have a lot of traffic on it, but nevertheless it seems to be in pretty good condition. As I said, the tree line is back from the road in most places, so that's a sense of openness. There are no markings some places, and there are some places where there are the white guideposts on the side of the road, and other places where there aren't. But generally it was a pretty good ride. Now, having got all that out of the way, I don't want to talk any more about the road. I'll just let you enjoy the scenery while I talk about what it is I want to talk about in this particular clip. And I want to talk about political donations to political parties and to election campaigns. And I want to start off by saying, getting you to consider this matter. Consider this idea. When President Barack Obama was running for his second term, it is claimed that he spent $1 billion to be re-elected. Now, I have no reason to know whether that figure is true or not true, but let's assume that it was true, $1 billion. Now, if we did the conversion to Australian dollars, I'd imagine that's something like $1.5 billion Australian. Now, I acknowledge first of all that yes, America has many more people, 330 million people, and something like, I guess, 200 million voters or something like that. So there are a lot more voters to appeal to. The country itself isn't bigger. Australia and the mainland United States are about the same size. The distances aren't that great, much greater, but there are many more states to visit, of course. And I acknowledge from the beginning that the advertising rates for political campaigns in the United States, in major markets like New York, those on the East Coast, and major cities on the West Coast, would be much more expensive than they would be in Australia. But nevertheless, those the rates would be relative. In other words, the rates for advertising in Sydney, Melbourne, and maybe even Brisbane would be considerably more expensive than they might be in Hobart or Launceston or Adelaide or Perth. So that's the first point to consider, the cost of the election. Now, elections in Australia cost tens of millions of dollars. I want you to keep that in mind as I go through what I want to talk about here. The second issue to consider when it comes to elections is who actually does the voting. And by that I mean it's you and I, the people whose names are on the electoral roll, individuals. Only individuals can actually go to a polling station, get their name marked off, and mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever it is they have to mark on the ballot paper, put it in the ballot box, and have their vote counted. All right? A corporation can't vote, a company can't vote, a lobby group can't vote, a think tank can't vote, a union can't vote. Members of a union can vote, certainly, but the union itself can't vote. The only people who can vote, and the people who put individuals in power, are the voters, and that's you and I. Now, in Australia, we have 6 states and 2 territories and a Commonwealth government. And each of those states and territories and the Commonwealth government have different rules about who is allowed to donate to political parties and political campaigns, how much they're allowed to donate, and when that money, how much of that money has to be declared and when it has to be declared. It is said that in New South Wales, they have some of the best rules and best laws. In New South Wales, as I understand it, if you donate more than $1,000 to a political party or a political campaign, the person to whom you donate it has to declare that to the Electoral Commission. Now, when they have to declare it is a tricky point because it's not in real time, it's not immediately. They may not have to declare it until something like a year or 18 months after the election has been held. So you might not know until well into the term of that government who's donating and who isn't donating. However, certain people in New South Wales, particularly property developers, are unable to donate to political parties. And the reason for that is that it was felt that property developers and their companies would benefit greatly from decisions made by state governments in terms of zoning laws and planning laws and getting buildings approved and so on, and they would have an undue influence on politicians, so they're not allowed to donate to political campaigns. When that law was introduced, which I think was by the government of Barry O'Farrell in about 2011, it may have been a bit after that, but when he became the Premier, the unions, they also tried to ban unions from donating to the Labor Party. And the union movement took that law to the High Court, and the High Court ruled against the law and said it was unconstitutional to prevent a union from donating to a political party because it was an infringement on the freedom of political expression. In my view, this is what should happen. Only individuals who are on the electoral roll and who voted in the last election and have lived in the state for at least 6 months should be able to donate to a political party. A union should not be able to donate to a political party. Its members can donate to whoever they want, but the union should not be able to donate to a political party. Woolworths, and I'm just using them as an example, should not be able to donate to a political party. The Commonwealth Bank should not be able to donate, because none of those organisations, none of those things actually have a vote. Yes, of course, they have an interest in the outcome of an election. You can imagine that a union would have an interest in how its members and workers in general are going to be looked after, and they would feel, for the most part, that the Labor Party would do a better job of looking after workers than the Liberal Party. And of course, banks and supermarkets and big corporations would think the Liberal Party or the Liberal National Party government would be better at managing the economy and looking after their interests than would be a Labor Party or Labor government, and they have a right to express their opinion. They have a right to lobby politicians when legislation is being proposed. But should they be able to donate to political parties? In my view, the answer is no. Let me give you an example of why I say that. As I said, each state and territory has different laws. The Commonwealth law says that if you donate you can donate up to $14,000 to a political campaign or to a political party, and only when it is above $14,000 does that money have to be declared to the Electoral Commission. Now, there's a lot of difference between $1,000 and $14,000, and you would imagine that someone donating $14,000 has a lot more influence, a lot more chance of getting an interview with a minister or a member of Parliament or even the Prime Minister than a person who's donated $1,000. In an election held in, I think, about 2018 in Tasmania, it may have been a different date, but about 2018 in Tasmania, the Labor Party at the time had a policy where they said that they wanted all poker machines that were in pubs and clubs to be removed. At one point, poker machines only existed in the 2 casinos in Hobart and Launceston, and then over time they were allowed to be in pubs and clubs. Now, the interesting point about all of this is that all the poker machines in Tasmania, I don't know the exact number of how many there are, but all the poker machines in Tasmania are operated by one company called the Federal Group. The Federal Group is a family company that's owned by a group of people who live in New South Wales, in Sydney. Obviously, their interests were affected if the Labor Party had been elected and had removed the poker machines from pubs, clubs, because for every poker machine that there is in Tasmania, this company gets a percentage of the money that goes through the poker machine. So the federal group donated large amounts of money, tens of thousands of dollars. What they did was legal. I'm not suggesting there was anything illegal about it. They were allowed to do it under the laws that exist. They were allowed to donate large sums of money to the Liberal Party, and they also funded campaigns by the pubs, or the groups that represented the pubs, and even groups that represented people who worked in pubs and clubs, who said, well, if the poker machine's taken away, we'll lose revenue, jobs will be lost, we'll lose our incomes, and so on. Now, some of those things may have been true. Yes, revenues in pubs may have gone down, and some jobs may have been lost. On the other hand, revenue may not have gone down, because some people who would not normally go to a pub because there's a poker machine there might have thought, well, now the poker machines are not there, and I don't have to put up with all that noise when I'm eating, I'll go to the pub for dinner, or I'll take the kids there. And so not all the jobs, maybe no jobs, or maybe not all the jobs that were said to have been lost would have been lost. Anyway, the outcome of that election was that the Labor Party lost the election, the Liberal Party was returned. Now, we cannot say definitively that the donations from the federal group influenced the outcome of the election, but we could certainly, or decided the result of the election. I think it's reasonable to say that they certainly influenced the outcome of the election. And my question is this: this is a company, not a group of people, not people who vote, not even people who live in that state and have a right to vote in that state, but people who have, a company that's donating money to a political party in the hope of influencing the outcome of an election to get the result they want. And I'm asking as a rhetorical question, which for you to be thinking about while you're listening to me here talk, is that a fair and right and proper thing? In my view, I want to think that the person who is elected to Parliament in my electorate, even if I didn't vote for them, is going to represent the interests of the electorate. They're going to look at the electorate, in my case it's the electorate of, I think it's called Hume at the federal level, and they're going to look at it and say, what are the things that are needed in the towns and cities and villages in my electorate? What things are people concerned about? What things are important to people? And I should represent those interests. I should work to get things done that the people say need done, whether it's getting a new hospital built in the city of Goulburn, for example, which is a state matter, but nevertheless, or getting another school built, or getting roads maintained, or getting bridges built, or dams built, or whether it's climate change, whatever it is. I want to think that the person who is elected to federal parliament, or to state parliament for that matter, to represent the electorates that I live in, state and federal, represents the people who does their best for the people who live in that electorate, the people who voted for them and the people who didn't vote for them, because that's their job. When we consider that we, the taxpayers, pay their salaries, we would expect that they were doing things that we wanted done, rather than attending to the issues that might be raised by corporations who don't get to vote because they're not on the electoral roll. And yes, they may have an interest in particular pieces of legislation that are put before the Parliament and that may affect their business, and then they have a right to speak to the Minister or use their lobby group, whether it's the Motor Trades Association or the Mining Council of Australia or the Small Business Association or whatever it is, to speak to the relevant person and to speak to the local member or to speak to the minister responsible and say, we're not happy with this bill and we'd like to see this or that happen to it. But ought it to be the case that corporations who can donate tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to the election campaigns of political parties, that they have more influence than you, because you can either donate no money, or you might think, oh, I'll make a donation of $50 to the election campaign of Joe Blow or Mary Smith who's standing in the electorate, and your $50 is greatly received because it helps do something. But somebody makes a $50,000 donation, obviously is going to have that's going to have more impact in terms of money, how that political party or that candidate can spend money and promote themselves and advertise and get elected. Now, as I said at the beginning of all this, the things that I think ought to happen are these. First of all, only individuals and individuals who are on the electoral roll and individuals who voted in the last election, unless of course you weren't eligible because you weren't old enough. Now imagine you were 16 when the last election was held, and you've now turned 4 years later 20 and you're ready to vote, and you've got a spare $1,000 and you want to donate it to a political party, then you could make a case for saying, well, I ought to be allowed to do that. But only under those conditions. You are on the electoral roll, you vote in the last election, and you live in the area in the state where you want to donate for at least 6 months. Should you be able to donate? You should not be able to, anything over $1,000 should be declared as a donation in real time. And by that I mean, if you make a donation, you should be able to go onto the Electoral Commission website and note that you've made a donation to the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, whoever it is that you've donated to, and the person you donated to has 5 days in which to make that also to acknowledge that donation in exactly the same way. If they haven't done so in 5 days, then the donation ought to be forfeited, and there ought to be a serious fine of something like 100 times the amount of money you donated as a deterrent for people not declaring these things. So those things ought to be clear. And in New South Wales, there is an extra thing that ministers' diaries have to be published every 3 months. So every 3 months, those people who want to know, particularly journalists and so on, can go onto a website somewhere, I guess, and look up and see which ministers have had meetings and who they've met with. Now, I presume that when those meetings are noted, it's noted not only that you're meeting Mary Jones, but Mary Jones from the Small Business Association or Joe Bloggs from the Motor Traders Association or something like that, so that it's possible to reference between, well, who are you meeting with and who's donating to your political campaigns, and is there any connection between those two things? Now, I'm not suggesting anyone's doing anything criminal by these things. I'm saying everyone's following the laws, but I'm saying the laws are far too loose. All right, enough of that. The clip's about to come to an end, so thank you for listening. Think about what I've said, and if you've got any feedback, please provide it at the end of the video in the comment section, and I'll respond if I'm able to. Thank you for watching, and I'll be talking to you again in the next video, which will be the 3rd clip in this journey.